So my name is Karen. Thank you all for coming this morning. Let me just share my screen here. And as Debbie said, I am an expert at really killing it. It's taken me years to perfect that, quite honestly. Today we're going to talk about all the ways that you might be accidentally killing your plants and how to help them live long and healthy lives. We're going to talk about not just plants out in the traditional garden, vegetables, trees, lawns. We're going to cover quite a few things today. So please remember, put your questions in the chat. There is a team of master gardeners here, and together, hopefully by the end of the presentation, if you have any questions, we'll be able to address them all. I am an expert at killing things. I am actively killing things as we speak. I am so happy to share that expertise with you today. I have killed it all. Houseplants, vegetables, perennials, annuals, herbs. I couldn't grow an orchid if my life depended on it, but I have one of my fellow master gardeners who's phenomenal with orchids. I am so envious. Succulents, supposed to be impossible. I've just plowed right through them. You name it, I have killed it over the years. I have learned that there are certain things that need to be done to determine why I'm killing things. There's a certain amount of questions to be asked. You have to do a little bit of detective work, for lack of a better description. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back real fast. So for a proper diagnosis, a really critical step is finding out exactly what is going on with the plant. Because before you can develop a control strategy, right, you have to determine what the culprit is. And this is where you put on your Sherlock Holmes hat, as we have here. It might sound obvious, but a strong way to begin is correctly identifying the actual plant. Sometimes people are not quite sure. You know, there's different types of succulents, there's different types of orchids. So you need to correctly identify the plant and become familiar with the normal, healthy state of that plant should be and what those characteristics are. And make sure you take into account seasonal effects as well. You also want to give thought to, is this occurring to one plant or multiple plants? Of course, that's all relative to the type of plant and where it is, right? You want to look for patterns. And by patterns, I mean you want to consider how long has this taken to develop? What kind of pattern is it? Is it occurring quickly or is it occurring slowly over several weeks or months? Have you tried anything in the past? And if so, has it helped or not? Is this the whole plant where you're having the issue, or is it just occurring in a certain part of the plant? Some additional questions, and again, this is all relative to, are you talking about a house plant? Are you talking about a tree? Are you talking about new sod? So this is somewhat broad, but again, has the plant recently been transplanted? Maybe there was a problem with the transplanting process. Maybe it doesn't like the new conditions, or maybe it doesn't like the soil that it has been transplanted to. You also want to keep in mind, have there been any construction occurring nearby? If we're talking about something outside or perhaps a tree, has there been any spraying or fertilizing that has gone on either around or near the plant? Maybe not yours, but maybe you live, for example, I live in a development. And my neighbor just thinks it's the bee's knees to go out and spray things all the time. I don't know what he's spraying, but it stands to reason that that's going to potentially affect my outdoor plants as well, whether it's carried by the breeze or carried by the bees or what have you. You also want to keep in mind regional weather, extremes in weather. And that could occur internally as well when we talk about humidity, if we're looking at houseplants. So weather is not just outside, it's inside. So just a few things to keep in mind. My personal experience is I've done all of these things. I have overwatered, underwatered. I took my succulents outside. That was a bad idea. They didn't survive that one. I have put the wrong plant in the wrong place. I have had pests, and then I've had soil with nutrient deficiencies. So we're not going to get into science, but we do have to talk about, when we're killing plants, about living factors and non-living factors. Okay, so bear with me for just a minute. You want to know, again, we're doing that sleuth work, we're doing that investigation into what's killing our plants. So you want to know if the problem is a result of a living factor or a non-living factor. And this is going to make sense in just a minute. Usually a living factor, and some of you might have heard the term biotic, B-I-O-T-I-C. Biotic is referring to living factors. Living factors can be things like diseases that can spread from one plant to another plant. But meanwhile, there are non-living factors, which you see here. Non-living factors are called abiotic, A-B-I-O-T-I-C. Abiotic problems tend to not spread in a similar fashion as a living factor would, okay? So you see here on the screen some examples of non-living things that can affect a plant's well-being. And again, we're talking very broad here. As I had said earlier, temperature extremes, either drought or excessive rain. We had a summer a couple of years ago, we had excessive rains, and it's a super challenge, super duper challenge. Soil types and conditions can play a role. Chemical factors would include nutritional deficiencies, as well as I said, pesticides, potential pesticides exposure. And it might not be herbicide or pesticides that you are using, but perhaps are in the area. Maybe you live near a crop that got sprayed. There's also mechanical factors. Lawnmowers, weed whackers are great at destroying the base of trees. Again, temperature extremes, light extremes, moisture extremes. There's so many things, there's so many factors that come into play. When we talk about living factors, again, living factors, the term you might see used in the literature is biotic. And you want to know if your problem is a result of things that are as a result of a living issue. They spread differently. So again, and I've said this previously, you want to look at the pattern and spread of what's going on with your plant or your tree or your grass to determine if it's a living or non-living issue. A living issue might be a pathogen, a disease, okay? Diseases in plants could be viral. They can be bacterial. They can be from nematodes. They can be from a fungus. I had several years where I had a problem with my tomatoes. Another living factor could be pests. My wild Canadian geese that are in the pond next to my home and I are sharing squash this year. I also planted a ton of natives in my backyard this year, and the stems are there, but all the heads of plants are gone. And I know it's a rabbit. My daughter has a groundhog in her backyard. Like he's just having a field day. So you want to be mindful of factors such as that. Insects can be chewing, piercing, or sucking insects. And I'm not saying that you're gonna know, but these are all factors to look at. Okay, and we're gonna get into specifics a little bit later. Keep in mind as well that plants that are grown indoors or outdoors can change over their lifetime. And not just because they're in bloom, but there are other things and other times where they can change. Leaves can change and fall off, and the plant can still be healthy. Other times these leaves can change and fall off. I think of a ficus tree. just not in a happy space, and it ends up succumbing. There are other times that plant changes can be indicative of diseases, fungal infection. You might see weird yellow or white spots suddenly appearing on leaves, leaves shriveling up. A formerly green plant takes on a yellow tinge. All of these might be indicators of something's going wrong. But as soon as you notice a problem, it's advisable not to put off treating and diagnosing that problem. Oftentimes it will go from bad to worse. Penn State Cooperative Extension, and I think I have this in the resources at the end, has a wonderful, wonderful guide to help remedy a lot of common problems and pest diseases with your houseplants. And you would just type in Penn State Cooperative Extension in your search bar. Excuse me. So let's look at some specifics. Watering. Everybody knows that proper watering is super important for indoor or outdoor plants. Many gardeners will look at a definitive schedule to take the guesswork out of gardening. Unfortunately, that doesn't always necessarily work. There's really no one set schedule that's going to work for any particular plant, or whether it be house plant or otherwise. It all is dependent upon so many factors, right? The type of plant, the potting mix that is used, the size of the container, the amount of sunlight that that plant is receiving, the indoor temperature, the humidity, if it's an indoor plant. Again, if you're looking at sod, is it newly laid sod? Is it established sod? All of these factors are going to influence your watering. They do sell moisture meters. You can find them, but I personally use the finger technique. Stick your finger about an inch or so into the soil surface of a small pot, for example. For a larger container, you might have to go your whole finger length into that container. And for succulents, obviously succulent soil is going to need to be a little bit drier. But I just stick my finger in below the surface to see what that moisture is. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't have to buy anything. Keep in mind that another idea that another master gardener had given me, which I thought was super smart, was the tuna can trick. He takes an empty tuna can that's been cleaned out and essentially uses it as a rain gauge. He'll put it outside to see how much water his garden, whether it be a raised bed garden or his grass, has gotten, because they're generally about an inch. And it's a solid way to measure the amount of water, even from your irrigation system, to determine how much your property is getting. Overwatering is also a big concern. More is not better when we speak to overwatering. If you think of it relative to, if you think about when you were a kid or when you're giving your grandchildren a bath, and if they're in the water too long, your fingers get all like pruny, right? Think about it the same way when you're watering your plants, or for that matter, your yards or your raised beds or your vegetables. It's really easy to overwater them, especially if there is not a good drainage system. This can happen because the pots they're in do not have adequate holes. And you know, it's not just pots. My son-in-law purchased a new raised bed this past year, and it had one drainage hole on the side, which was really illogical because you'd have to tip it for it to drain out that hole. So it's not just house plant pots, which I see an awful lot of that do not have adequate drainage. It could be a raised bed, it could be a planter, it could be a hanging basket, what have you. So if there are not adequate holes to let that excess water run out, it can get pretty ugly. There's a lot of really beautiful planters that are decorative, but that water is going to pool up on the bottom and you're going to get the same results. Essentially, it's a drowned plant. And then those plants are going to have root rot. Too much water will saturate the soils. It's going to displace the air, and those roots are going to be starving for oxygen. Saturated soils cause the roots to die and really negatively affect water uptake. The symptoms of overwatering, you're going to see things like leaf yellowing. You're going to see wilting, potentially leaf loss. If we're looking at trees, you're going to see that canopy die back. Tree death can occur when standing water is persistent. So it's really important to be mindful of water. And it's also very important to be mindful of the type of plant you're watering, because all of them have different needs. That being said, when you're planning your gardening space, it might be mindful to keep the watering needs of the plants in various areas in mind, so that you can adequately water them all without drowning any of them. You can have your soil texture analyzed to determine its water holding capacity. Please keep in mind that I am speaking from Delaware. I am a Delaware master gardener. In our state, although it's a small state, we have very, very different soil texture throughout the state. As we get further south, it can be very sandy, which is permeable. Clay soils, which we might find in Kent, will hold water a little bit more. So it's not necessarily such a bad idea to have your soil analyzed, and I'll provide you with some resources as we move along here to have things like that done. I love this graphic from the University of Maryland Master Gardeners. As with all things, too much or too little light can be detrimental. Some plants require full sunlight. Others require partial sunlight, and then again, some prefer shade. And it's up to you to have the knowledge of what your plants, trees, shrubs, what have you, need, and place them in your space accordingly. Light is actually one of the most essential factors for healthy growth, especially for indoor plants. That's where I had my issue primarily with some plants. Aesthetically, they looked great in the places that I put them, but they weren't getting enough light. I was not in touch with their needs. It's kind of like a relationship, right? You need to be in touch with the needs of your plants. Keep in mind that light has to do with photosynthesis. Energy is derived from photosynthesis, and that depends upon the amount of intercepted light by the leaves. When we speak of indoor plants, they can be classified according to light needs as well as tolerances. And you might see on some tags high, medium, or low light needs. Again, select your indoor plants according to the availability of natural light in your home or office. Nowadays, they have, you can purchase decorative plant lights if you're really hot on putting a plant in a certain space and it does not have access to sunlight. So there are options available to supplement with artificial lighting if you work in a space where you don't have enough natural light for the plants. What I thought was really neat about this graphic is that it demonstrates the difference, because guess what, I didn't know. What is meant by medium light, low light, direct light relative to a room and a window. So let's talk about that for a minute. When we talk about light intensity, that is dependent on the distance from the light source, and it decreases with increasing distance. And you'll see that here on the far left of that graphic, or the far right of that graphic, with number 4, That is a low light intensity, is the furthest away from that window. Again, this influences photosynthesis. You will see that having effects on not only the stem length, the leaf color, the leaf size, and its flowering ability. So these are all what might seem obvious, but super, super important. Keep in mind as well, factors that might lead to a light obstruction. Things like curtains, insect screening, the seasons of the year. You might need to move your plants to a different side of the home or the room. Shade from trees or other buildings. The type of window that you have. Some windows have a protectant film that might affect that. Keep in mind that as well, ambient light levels can be increased by a reflective light colored surface on the inside of the room. So lots of factors to keep in mind. That being said, excessive light can be just as harmful as too little light. So if your plant gets too much direct light, the leaves can become pale, turn brown, and ultimately die. What we also want to keep in mind relative to light is not just intensity, but duration. Duration refers to the length of time the plant will receive light each day. So take, for example, poinsettias or Christmas cactuses. Those are examples of flowering plants that are very sensitive to the length of light. Buds and flowers will only develop when the day length is short. And by short, I mean 11 hours or less. So again, being knowledgeable about your plant needs, where they are placed, and how you're addressing those needs. Interestingly, most plants require a period of darkness to develop properly. So you don't want to have light for more than 16 hours a day in total, especially if you're combining artificial light with natural light. So if you're like me, one of my kids got one of those artificial grow lights that was super pretty and decorative. And I'm like, oh, this is great. I'll leave it on. The plant will be happy. No, I did a really good job of killing the plant that time because I gave it too much light. The duration was too long. So been there, done that. Don't make my mistakes. We also want to talk about the quality of light. So artificial light is artificial light. It's really good. And if that's the route you have to go, that's fine. But it's never going to be the same as sunlight. Sunlight is best for plant growth. Artificial light improves the quality of light that the plants receive and will improve plant growing, but it's never going to be the same as sunlight, right? I mean, it just is what it is. If you find that indoor plants are getting too much light, they will become spindly, or what we call leggy, because they are stretching to reach that light, okay? Keep in mind that also if the light is only coming from one direction, you're going to want to, if you're able to, move your plants, rotate them so that they're not just getting the light on one side, because then they're going to be really lean on one side. So additional symptoms of a plant that's getting too much light that you might see, again, are the fading leaf color, diminished flowering, poor growth, right? House plants can fail to have a really healthy start if they're not getting adequate light. Plants can already be stressed by transplanting or being moved. Oftentimes the plants that we might purchase have been grown in a greenhouse, and moving from that humid type of heat environment to a store that may not be really well lit, to your home, all of that stresses a plant. And all of these are going to play factors in it. This was a lovely graphic that I got online, which you all have in your handouts as well, that show what a plant will look like with certain soil deficiencies. Again, all of these are elements that are important for your plant's success, but there will be a visual manifestation in the leaves of potential deficiencies. And again, you'll see this in your graphic, whether it be white spots on the leaves, whether it be yellow spots where you're having a manganese deficiency, lower leaves turning yellow, a magnesium issue. And I'm going to give you some resources to determine if any of these exist in your soil as we get a little bit further on. So let's talk about some specifics. House plants. Do you ever try and put on a pair of shoes that were super duper pretty, but they were too small and it kind of hurts and gets uncomfortable and your feet hurt and you might get a blister? Well, think of this relative to a big house plant being put in too small of a pot. Okay, it is not happy, it is not comfortable, it doesn't feel good. The root systems get big, and eventually over time, they're going to fill that entire container. And when this happens, it's time to move to a bigger, larger house. It's time to move on. The pot might be really pretty, but it's time for it to move on, because ultimately this is going to cause harm to your plant, as you can see visually here. Okay, to fix that problem, you are going to need to transplant to a larger pot with more soil and more space for that plant to grow. The image here with this plant, this is a plant that is in way too small of a pot. I also tend to think that this plant is also overwatered. Why? Because you're going to see what you see here with these yellowing leaves. Again, symptoms of excessive moisture. You're going to see root rot. You're going to see potentially drought stress if a plant is underwater. The primary symptom of excess water is the wilting and yellowing of the lower leaves like we see here. And if that excess water continues, it's just not good. It's just not good. And again, there's so many factors that come into watering that you have to be mindful of. The type of drainage in your pot, the age of your plant, the humidity, the temperature exposure. There's so many things that come into play. Your potting mix can be dried out. Just be mindful. If you're finding that if you have a saucer under your plant, any water that collects in saucers, you want to throw out. Why? Because that's going to breed insects like fungus gnats, which you also don't want in your home. That being said, how about lawns? A healthy lawn is going to resist invasion by diseases, pests, moss, weeds. The grass that's typically recommended in our state is tall fescue. It is recommended that it is mowed regularly to a height of 2 to 3 inches. Oftentimes, I will see individuals cut the grass much shorter. This is going to cause stress. If you cause stress on any of your plants, including grass, this is going to allow them to potentially be invaded by a disease and potentially die. And I understand why people are doing it. If you're going to cut it shorter, they only have to do it less frequently. I understand that, but unfortunately, you're potentially leaving your lawn for damage. Keep in mind that the lawnmower blades need to be kept sharp. It is recommended that you mow weekly during most of the growing season, twice a week if the grass is growing really rapidly in mid to late spring. You want to cut only 1/3 of the grass height with each mowing. Unfertilized or Under or over fertilized lawns are more prone to pests and diseases. Too much or too little of a good thing isn't great. You really need to determine that sweet spot. Under fertilized lawns are going to look thin. They might be light green or brown in color. They'll often have moss or weeds mixed in. And you see here some additional recommendations based on the lawn conditions. There is a resource called Delaware Livable Lawns, and you can look this up in an internet search. This is a program that certifies lawn companies that follow environmentally friendly practices in fertilizer application. And they provide homeowners with necessary information about lawn care practices, as well as how to be good stewards of the environment when applying those. So let's talk about tree health. Hopefully your tree doesn't look like the one on the left here. Of course, with regard to tree health, we need to begin with a healthy tree that shows no signs of insects or disease. We want that tree to have a strong trunk and roots that are not pot bound or root bound, as it were. When you're planting that tree, you want to choose a site that's large enough for the mature tree. Oftentimes, that's exactly what I see done. The trees are not placed in appropriate conditions, thinking long term. And as such, they don't succeed because they don't have the space. You want to dig a hole that's no deeper than the root ball, but actually 3 times as wide. I've done this too. Dig a really deep hole. No, not so much. You want it really wide. You don't want it necessarily so deep. Why? Because those roots are going to grow out. You're loosening that soil for them to do that. When you dig that hole, try testing it out for drainage. Put some water in there. See how it drains overnight. It should drain at a rate of ½ an inch per hour. When you're putting the tree in the hole, you want to remove any container material. By that, I mean the burlap, the ties, obviously if it's in a plastic container or some similar device, wire basket perhaps, you want to remove that. You put the tree in the hole, the top of the root ball should be at ground level. Again, we don't want that hole so deep, but we do want it wide. If the root you find is wrapping around the root ball, you want to loosen those. Just get in there with your fingers, loosen it up. Spread the roots out into the wide hole. Keep those roots moist while you're planting. If you find any damaged roots, you want to trim those. If the roots completely wrap around the root ball, I would return that tree and see if you can get a replacement. When you're backfilling that hole, you want to fill it with soil. Tap it lightly to fill the hole. Try and remove any air pockets. Water thoroughly and soak it deeply. This is one of those times that you don't need to be concerned about overwatering. You're going to want to be watering that tree a lot to establish it. You want to cover the planting area with 3 to 4 inches of organic mulch. You don't want to use a sheet plastic under the mulch. That could potentially kill the tree roots. You only want to prune if there are major forms of problems. You don't want to, what do they call it when they put so much mulch around the tree? It's like a cone. I see it everywhere. It drives me insane. You don't want to over mulch around a tree. It is not a good thing. That being said, you never want to top a tree. I see that all the time too. Drives me insane. You don't want to do that. This is going to harm the tree and it's going to become structurally unsound. If you're going to spend the kind of money that they charge for trees, you want to be able to take care of them. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm back. So this little graphic here, this little cone on the bottom, we're going from the bottom up. You're starting with a healthy tree and all those items that I spoke about. Proper site, proper tree, proper location. You want to loosen the soil at least 3 feet wide, not too deep. You also want to loosen the roots in that root ball. Put on your gloves, get in there, loosen it up. Again, we spoke about backfilling. You want to mulch appropriately and not have over mulch around the base of that tree. The mulch allows for moisture to be retained, but too much is very detrimental, very, very detrimental. You want to be sure you prune properly, and that's going to give you a healthy tree. Record keeping, something that you might not have thought of. Keeping records weekly, monthly of your general plant health. This might help you pinpoint if there's a change in appearance, ultimately leading to progression of symptoms and potential disease. Okay, records are really helpful in determining what type of particular management or practices might have caused the symptoms. So something you might want to give thought to. And they do sell garden journals, but you can just get a regular notebook. That being said, when we talk about right plant, right place, I'm sure you all, oh, you can't see it. I'm sure you all are familiar with these lovely plant tags. You can find them in annuals, perennials, all kinds of things. This is where we talk about right plant, right place. When you buy a plant, wherever you purchase it, it will come with this little spike that tells you the name of the plant, as well as care instructions on the back, okay? Read it. Even keep it somewhere for later. I've seen people, remember the old photo albums that you used to be able to lift up a film and put a picture in? Get one of those, or tape it in your plant journal so you remember what you planted there. So there's some variation in plant tags. This one I got from a particular farm, and it's got a lot of information. Not all plant tags are going to have all of this information, but I did want to take the time, and I know we're getting short on time, but I did want to take the time to explain to you why this is important. Oftentimes on the front of the tags, you're going to see the fundamental information. Maybe the common name as well as a scientific name. Sun exposure and bloom season are common things that we would see. The common name is what the plant is generally called, what you and I might call it. The scientific name is like the genus, the species. We have some master gardeners that are phenomenal with these. I even took a class, forget it, I can't do it. I would have failed Latin in high school. But plants can be known by different common names. Sun exposure, again, is oftentimes listed. It will describe the number of hours of sunlight that that particular plant variety needs per day. It might also tell you that it requires full sun, part sun, shade, or full sun. Full sun plants need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight a day. Partial sun shade plants need about half that amount, and full shade plants will need less than 3 hours of sunlight per day. Now, why they don't refer to it by the hours of sun needed, I couldn't tell you. But now you know what that secret code is. Part sun, full sun. The bloom cycle might be listed on your tab. That's going to describe the what to expect when the plant blooms, whether it's in the summer, the winter, or the fall. Okay. The graphic you see here is the back of the plant tag. And again, the back of the plant tag is devoted to more specific details about how to care for the plant. It might include the average size, the hardiness, the type of fertilization. The average size is telling us the height and width of a plant. The height and width when it's full grown. Spacing is describing how far apart to dig the planting holes when you're putting the plant in your garden or bed. The hardiness zone tells you what region the plant grows best in. Here in Delaware, we're in 7A. The USDA plant zone can be looked up online as well, super easy to find. Why this is important? Because it's going to speak about the growing conditions, okay? The hardiness zones oftentimes are not a concern if you're buying in Delaware in a local garden center, because they are suited for your area, but it would be something you want to be mindful of if you are purchasing outside of our state or potentially online. Excuse me. When we speak to fertilization, which you see here listed on this particular tag, it's not on all tags. There's no standard for these tags. Fertilization is indicating how often to fertilize a plant for best results. That being said, the water is describing how often to water this particular plant variety. And it's going to vary by variety, but it's also going to vary upon, as we spoke earlier, about the conditions that you're putting that plant in, okay? Animal resistance is kind of interesting. It's located on this tag. It's not on all tags. Sometimes you'll see it indicated by an icon. For example, being deer resistant or rabbit resistance means that the animals typically will not feed on that plant as indicated by that tag, okay? An icon with a crossed out deer or rabbit means that animal won't nibble on the plant at all. You might see indicators on a plant tag about growth. This refers to the maximum average size of that variety of plant. It'll talk about height as well as width. And finally, there are some tags that will have a brief description of steps that should be taken at the time of planting. And that's why I wanted to show you this particular plant tag. It's got a ton of information on it. And it does that very thing at the very bottom. It says planting steps, which is kind of interesting. Again, you will not find all that information on every plant tag. There is no standard. If you're not able to find information to the extent that you would like on a plant tag, or if the individual where you purchase the plant isn't able to help you, you can always look up that information, evidence-based, at the Delaware Cooperative Extension. Just in your search engine, type Delaware Cooperative Extension and the name of your plant, and odds are you will come up with something. And again, if you're looking for evidence-based research that's accurate, you would want to do that through a cooperative extension. Our neighbors at Penn State have phenomenal resources as long as you're looking at a cooperative extension. Your information will be accurate. That being said, if you're interested in having soil testing done, we spoke about nutrients in the soil and the effects it will have on your plant. You can get soil testing done right here in Delaware through the cooperative extension. You do not have to drive up to Newark. You can drop it off at your cooperative extension, and here is the link. For those of you who are not in Delaware, look up your local cooperative extensions. They will have the same service available, I am sure. And you will find directions on how to get that information, any associated costs, and how to take a soil sample. You can take a soil sample of your raised bed veggie garden. You can take a soil sample of your lawn if it's not growing well. That being said, you can also, through the local cooperative extension, send an actual sample of the plant where you're finding you have concerns. It can be a house plant, it can be a bush, it could be a tree, you name it. You can send that off, and it will be sent to here in Delaware, the University of Delaware. If it's a bug, the entomologist will look at it. If not, we will have the scientists up at UD look at it and confirm what is going on with the plant, as well as treatment recommendations. It's a great, great service. So that being said, as we round the end of our discussion, for success in growth, you need to have the right plant in the right place, proper watering, proper light, make sure that disease and pest free that plant is, and that's going to lead you to that road for healthy plants. And again, here are some resources that I used for today's presentation. Oh yes, no more than University of Pennsylvania, University of Maryland Cooperative Extension also has phenomenal resources, many of which I used for today's presentation, that you might find useful relative to specific plants. So thank you all so very much. Many of you had today off. Thank you all so very much for coming. I appreciate your time. And this would be the time that we could open the floor for questions.
Sure. Thanks, Karen. There were a few questions that came in on the chat. One question is, if I'm away for 2 weeks, is it okay to thoroughly water my houseplants and let them sit in a dish of water? How about outdoor plants in pots?
That's tricky. I am not a fan of leaving the plants in a pot of water for numerous reasons, one of which is I did get those gnats one time, which are a son of a gun to get rid of. So if we're talking about indoor plants, I guess it would be relative to how warm you're going to keep the house when it's gone. I would also be concerned about root rot if you're going to leave your plants sitting in some water. They do make devices that will slowly water a plant while you're gone. I have tried you'll see on the internet, like a soda bottle upside down. I did not have much success with that. You know what you could try? You could try leaving a fabric or maybe even something like felt saturated on the top of the plant so that it can slowly absorb. Or maybe putting some kind of a device around the top of the plant with small holes so that it will slowly infuse. That being said, for outdoor plants, if you don't put them in line with an irrigation system, that gets a little bit trickier. Traditionally, I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a lawn irrigation system, so if I'm gone, if I'm able to move those potted plants, I'll put them where I know the sprinklers will hit them while I'm gone. Otherwise, I would ask a neighbor because you run the risk of overwatering, much more so with the indoor plants than I would be concerned about the outdoor plants. I don't know. Do you all have any additional thoughts?
I have some suggestions for house plants. So, you know, if you have a variety, let's say you've got some tropical kind of plants and then you've got some succulent kind of plants, you can group them together based on need. And, you know, also they say that you could, you know, if you lower your temperature down to 65, for while you're gone, that's beneficial. Move your plants away from some direct sunlight if it's super hot, or go on vacation in the winter because plants need less care in the winter than they do in the summer. But you could also, to try to increase your humidity, you could put, you know, kind of, you know, fill up like a bowl of water just to kind of make the humidity in your space a little bit better for them while you're gone. But most plants, if you water thoroughly before you leave, they should be good for 2 weeks. But another tip would be to put those pebbles, you know, in the bottom of your holding dish, and that way you can kind of get some moisture that way. So it's not like the roots are sitting in water, you know, but there's, you know, evaporation happening to create more humidity in your area. But 2 weeks is normally, if you water thoroughly before you leave, you should be okay for most house plants. Now, outside plants, that's a whole nother story. You know, it's going to depend. You know, are they calling for rain? If, you know, you could get lucky and you get rain, but if not, you know, I mean, even kind of protecting those those containers and moving them into a more shady area that could kind of help them, just for a brief period of time until you get back. So those are my tips.
Two things
The
that I've
next question.
found that have helped with keeping plants watered while I'm away are choosing a good potting soil type. And this works for indoor and outdoor container plants, but choose a potting soil type that has those moisture control beads in it, because those will release some moisture as the surrounding soil dries out. And will also take up some excess moisture, say if you get a big rain, or if your ceiling leaks, which happened to me one time. And along with that, choosing an appropriate container size, because if your plant is root bound, it's going to dry out very fast. It's also going to struggle to retain water when you water it. I guess this is 3 tips, because the other one I meant to mention was I actually kind of mulch the top of my container plants. Depending on the nature of the plant, I'll use aquarium gravel, like just rinse it first and then put it on. It doesn't have to be a super thick level. You just don't want to see the soil. Or
That's a good idea.
I'll use orchid bark, the orchid potting medium, which is just bark to put on the surface. And that retains a little moisture, and it also discourages weeds if it's outside and pests if it's inside, especially those fungus flies.
Very interesting. That's it. Yeah, I don't know why I never thought of mulching the inside plants. What a neat idea. Thank you.
It also looks a little tidy, so.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good, thanks. The next question is, I have African violets, one rebloomed and the other did not. I repotted and the leaves are green and beautiful, but they are not blooming. What would encourage blooming?
Increase the amount of light. So either get artificial light or relocate it to a brighter area. Also, African violets like warm temperatures. So they like to be around 70 degrees during the day, 65 to 70 at night. So those are 2 potential options. If the leaves look healthy and they're not wilted or limp, that would be my suggestion. You're not seeing any leaf spots, any pale leaves, things along that line. And I didn't really know that. University of Minnesota Cooperative Extension has a great resource about African violets.
Yeah, and they do like to eat. So feeding them a fertilizer of like a 15-20-15 or 20-20-20 that's specifically made for an African violet, that can sometimes help too. I know, so I have quite a few of them, and I do have a tip. I shouldn't say it during recording because it's not scientifically proven. I've said that up front, but from my experience, a little bit of peroxide in the water does, not a whole lot, just a little bit. It does encourage bloom. For why that works, I don't know. There's no research behind it, but just a little bit in the water has helped mine. And I know I'm not supposed to say, but it's my research that it has been effective.
Cool.
That. Let's see. The next question is, my June bearing strawberries appear to be done. Should I remove the pine mulch I have around them to allow the runners to root? Is there a way for me to know which are the oldest plants that need to come out in order to provide room for the new ones? They are in a raised bed, not in neat rows.
Oh boy, I'm not a strawberry planter.
I'm not either.
I have wild strawberries, but I don't have any of the other gardeners on the line.
I have strawberries.
Oh, there you go, Debbie.
I have strawberries which are also in raised beds, but I don't always follow the rules. So I have learned by trial and error. My strawberries, there's June bearing and there's ever bearing. I have both. My June bearing are also finished for the year. Well, I have just like maybe 2 or 3 left out there. Last year I followed the recommendations and I covered them all with straw. And when I uncovered them in the spring, they did not look good. And I'm like, I've never covered them with straw before, although that's recommended. So I said, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore, because maybe because they're in the raised bed or some other situation, that didn't work for me. But they do shoot out runners, and nothing stops them from shooting out runners. So I would say that if your strawberries are done and you want that to encourage the runners, you can just remove some of that that pine straw or whatever the mulch is you have on there, so that they have room to catch roots. And we had a presentation about strawberries. I believe it was recorded a while back, done by our gardening experts, Larry and Leslie Cook. And I believe you can access that, where they give a lot of good advice about strawberry growing on our recorded virtual recordings. Um, but I would just say, let them do their thing. I kind of tend to leave mine alone, and they do best when I don't bother them. And they are, like I said, they are also in raised beds. I just have to keep them from escaping the raised beds, which is also a problem. But the ones that did escape last year, I transplanted back into the beds, and they did pretty well. So generally, I think strawberries are pretty easy to grow. Was that the whole question, or was there something else?
How do you tell the oldest from the new?
I mean, the new ones you'll see they'll be fresher and greener, but I don't remove the old ones. I don't do that. I just leave them grow and let the new ones go. If you want to, you can tell the mother plant is the one that the original plant is the one that has all the shoots coming off of it that'll reroot. And you can remove those and start new plants, the daughter plants. And I think there's a really good explanation of that in that recording that Larry and Leslie did. Also, they did an awesome job on strawberries there.
Yep, and it is there on the recording list.
Yep.
Thank you, Debbie. Also, Debbie put in the evaluation. If you could complete that just to let us know how we did, what we could do better, that would be great. The next question, Karen, is my tomato plant is drooping, but I do see tomatoes budding on it. Any ideas of what the issue may be? Overwatering, underwatering, and they're adding, it's outside on the deck in a grow bag.
Okay, so, well, a couple of things come to mind. The first is, I believe that there is a recording. Didn't we record
About tomatoes?
Yeah, Verna and I did a whole tomato presentation.
Yep.
So I would recommend looking at that because the drooping could potentially be something called bacterial wilt, which is a bacterial disease. It can be seen in very high temperature, high moisture environments, and we've had quite a few crazy hot days, especially in the last week here in Delaware.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say too, that my tomatoes at home, they got a little sad when it got really hot out. So I don't know if it's just a recent thing or is it something that's been happening. It's kind of hard to troubleshoot without knowing that.
Yeah, exactly. The other thought is sometimes my experience with grow bags is sometimes they can dry out quicker than a traditional pot or a traditional garden. So again, I would use the finger trick and put your finger all the way in there and see how moist it is below the surface. The surface might appear very dry, but it could be very wet underneath. So is it getting enough sunlight, or proper sunlight, I guess I should say? Verify that it's not being overwatered, because again, and it depends upon the material that the grow bag is made out of. And I've seen them out of a lot of materials. The one I used that I'm speaking about was felt. And as such, it had great airflow because it was a fabric, but it also had that ability to evaporate a little bit quicker. So be mindful of the sunlight, be mindful of the watering, and look for any potential diseases. And look at our video, because in the video, which is on the Kent County Master Gardener's website, we have a whole hour that speaks of proper growing conditions, but we cover quite a few of these diseases, including bacterial wilt, as well as leaf scorch and blight. Look at the leaves of the plant as well to see if there's, and when I say look at the leaves, the underside as well as the overside, to see if there's any kind of spots. They could be yellow, they could be brown, indicating a disease.
You know, one other thing I just thought about. So in those grow bags, there are specific varieties of tomatoes that do better than others in those kind of bags. Like there's like a tumbling Tom would be good because they tend to kind of go with the bag, and you know they fan out rather than go vertical. So that could be something too. But she just says drooping, doesn't say anything about color or spots or anything like that, but drooping. My first guess would be, you know, under watering with the high heat, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's see. Next, what would you recommend for outdoor soil enhancements? Humus or aged animal manure, Fox Farm, Black Gold, etc.
Yeah. Well, excuse me, that's a bit of a loaded question for multiple reasons. One, we don't know, Karen, where we're speaking about for what soil enhancements for what, and that being said, I personally don't put anything down without getting a soil test. I even got a soil test on my raised beds this year and was shocked to find out that the nutrients were way off. And it's not only saved me some money because I didn't have to go out and buy anything because, you know, they were so high, but I'd hate for you to be spending money on something that wasn't needed, or causing more of a problem by using things that your soil might not need. So I guess the first question would be, where are we referring to? The second would be, are you visualizing an issue that you think is requiring some sort of fertilizing or something?
Karen, did you want to unmute and let us know what you have?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So my question was pertaining to raised beds specifically. What I when I first started them, we did the whole organic kind of like pizza layer, you know.
Oh, sure.
And then every few years I have a friend that has, she calls it horse fodder. And we usually go get a truckload of that to just integrate into the soil. I have you guys coming out actually tomorrow.
Oh,
yes. For a couple of different things. And one, I think that's a great resource. I wasn't aware of it until I saw it on my Facebook gardening group. And I know you guys advertise it and all, but I totally missed it.
It's brand new. That's a brand new program that we made. So that's pretty cool.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm looking forward to the soil testing. Typically that's what we do is just integrate the horse manure. I do occasionally get some humus from Tractor Supply, but you mentioned the soil gnats, and I'm not sure if I am helping, harming, you know, by what product I choose, but I guess it all starts with the soil analysis.
correct. Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Fungus
May I add
typically
something?
are in containers or house plants where there's this excess moisture. Like a lot of greenhouses get fungus gnats. I mean, you can get them outside if you've got like really saturated soil, like where, you know, things are not able to dry out.
May I
Right.
add something?
Yep, sure.
Yes,
the raised-
Anita.
I have 4 big raised beds, and one thing that I was ignoring for a number of years was crop rotation within
Oh,
those
sure.
beds. If you're putting the same plants in the same bed every year, you're depleting the soil, and they recommend in a number of places 3 to 4 year rotation. You don't put the same plant back in the same place for 3 or 4 years. And the worst, of course, are the nightshades.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great point. Yep, I do rotate. And I also do the companion gardening when I do have things planted, but that's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point, Anita. Yeah, I would get a soil sample. Keep in mind as well, first of all, you might be putting things that aren't needed in that space. as well, and Megan, you might know this, you know, it all is dependent as well, if you're getting, how old is the manure,
Well, right.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty aged, I think.
Good. Good.
Yeah, okay,
That's just the fear with manure. If you you put it on too hot, you can burn your plants and
Mhm.
Yeah.
but if it's sat for a while, you should be good to go.
yeah, yeah. And ask tomorrow when they come out, ask them for the information about soil testing.
Yep, they're going to be doing that.
There you go. Perfect. Good timing.
So I got another chat in there. I just sent back, it was a private message about the program. So they do have a program in Newcastle County that's like the garden advice program, where they'll go out and do a site visit. They don't have one yet in Sussex County, but it's funneling down. So I'm assuming Sussex will be joining the party soon. So Marcia, if you want to send me your email address, I can get you in contact. Thank you. The next question is, can I grow different varieties of sweet potatoes in the same bed? Also, I put them out last week because our weather has been up and down this spring. Was that wise? I have Beauregard, Jewel, and Purple.
Oh, Debbie is the sweet potato lady. I defer to you, Debbie.
Okay. I actually, this is what, Karen Vicks? Hi, Karen. I actually have the exact same setup. I have purple, white, and orange sweet potatoes all planted in the same bed together. That's perfectly fine. Even if you forget which ones are where, which I try to keep them so I know what's where, but you'll have a pleasant surprise when you dig them up. So sweet potatoes, it is definitely not too late to plant them. They like hot weather. So if you just planted them, that's fine. Just make sure that you keep them watered and keep the weeds away at the very beginning for the first few weeks, because especially if they're freshly planted and we get any hot weather, they need to get a lot of water until they get started. Once they get started, they are actually the most low maintenance thing in my garden. So I love it. I can go on vacation and leave them alone and count on that. They don't require a ton of water. They don't require a ton of care. As long as you just make sure that you keep the vines from taking over your whole yard, that will work. And let's see. Okay, most varieties of sweet potatoes take 90 to 120 days to be ready. You can't tell by looking at the plant because they're underground. So what you can do is wait at least 90 days. So what is it? It's now June. So July, August, September, like mid-September, you can check if you'd like to see if they're ready. But I tend to leave mine until October before I begin to harvest, to make sure they're nice and big and fat. So you should be fine. It sounds like that's, you're right on the right track for that.
I think that's it for questions, right?
Yep, that's all I have for questions. So thank you very
Great.
much, Karen. I appreciate it. And Debbie
Thank
and
you all for coming.
the whole team, thank you for being here.
I hope you learned something.
Yes,
Thanks
great.
all for your time.